The rich woman yelled at the janitor until she saw his face. "Are you blind or just stupid?" The words hit the lobby before the mop even touched the floor again. The janitor froze. Water still dripped from the mop head, sliding across polished marble. He turned, slowly, and looked up. A woman in a white suit stood in front of him, anger carved into every inch of her perfect face. Diamonds on her wrist flashed like lightning. "I asked you a question," she snapped, stepping closer. "You almost ruined my shoes. These cost more than your entire paycheck." Her voice echoed against the marble walls. Every employee behind the front desk went quiet. The only sound was the squeak of her heels and the drip of mop water. "Ma'am," the janitor said softly, "I put the wet floor sign up. You walked past it," she gasped, offended. "Are you trying to blame me? You people never learn your place." "You people?" he repeated, eyes calm but sharp. She waved her hand, dismissive. "Custodians, workers, whatever you call yourselves. You're supposed to make things clean, not make them dangerous." He looked down, wringing the mop handle once, then met her gaze again, unflinching. "Yes, ma'am. I clean what's dirty," her nostrils flared. "Excuse me?" He shrugged lightly. "That's my job. Has been for years," the woman's lips curled. "Then maybe you should clean your attitude before I call security." A guard nearby took one nervous step forward, but the janitor lifted a hand. Calm, respectful. "It's all right, sir. I was just finishing up anyway." He turned to leave, pushing the mop bucket quietly across the floor. The woman rolled her eyes. "Unbelievable. I'll make sure the board hears about this. People like you need to be reminded who owns this place." The janitor stopped, just for a second, then turned his head slightly. "Funny thing about ownership," he said quietly. "It changes hands all the time." Her brows knitted. "What's that supposed to mean?" He smiled, small, patient, knowing. "You'll see." And with that, he disappeared down the hall, leaving the woman fuming, her reflection staring back at her in the wet marble floor. The receptionist let out a shaky breath. "You shouldn't have said that to him," she whispered. Mrs. Langford scoffed. "He's just a janitor." The receptionist hesitated. "That's what you think." Because down in the basement, away from the glittering lights, the janitor was taking off his gloves, revealing a silver watch worth more than her purse. He glanced at his phone and a message popped up. "Mr. Carter, the board awaits your arrival. Room 12A. He smiled, slow and sure. "Let's clean this place properly." The glass boardroom sparkled with morning sunlight. Polished table, designer suits, expensive coffee that no one drank because everyone was too busy talking about the same thing. "Who is this new investor?" one man whispered. "He's the one who saved us from bankruptcy," another replied. "But no one's ever seen him." At the far end of the table, Mrs. Langford adjusted her pearl necklace. Yesterday's incident with the janitor was a distant memory in her mind. Barely worth a thought. She sat upright, proud, flawless, and impatient. "When will he get here?" she snapped. "Some of us have other meetings." The chairman smiled politely. "He's on his way. He prefers to observe before he acts," she scoffed. "That's just another word for arrogance. Typical of rich men who think money makes them wise." The door opened. Everyone turned. A man stepped inside wearing a dark, tailored suit. Simple, elegant, commanding. His gait was calm. His presence filled the room before his voice even did. Mrs. Langford didn't look up. Finally, the mystery man appears. "Now can we—" Then she froze. Her voice died in her throat. Her fingers gripped the table. It was him. The janitor. David Carter stood at the head of the table. The same quiet eyes, same calm tone. No uniform now, only power. He smiled faintly. "Good morning, everyone." The chairman stood immediately. "Mr. Carter, it's an honor to finally meet you in person. Everyone, this is David Carter, our new majority shareholder and partner." Every face in the room shifted. Confusion, shock, whispers. But none more than hers. Mrs. Langford's lips parted slightly. You can't be serious." David turned toward her slowly. "Good to see you again, ma'am. I trust the floors were to your liking yesterday?" A quiet chuckle rippled around the room. Polite, nervous, her cheeks flushed red. I didn't know who you were," he nodded. "That's the point. I wasn't looking to be known. I was looking to see." He placed his hands on the table, his tone calm but firm. "I started as a janitor in this very building 20 years ago. I cleaned floors while most folks didn't see me at all. But I paid attention to the company, to its people, to how they treat those they think don't matter." No one breathed. Mrs. Langford lowered her eyes. For the first time, her power felt small. David's gaze was steady. "Yesterday, I learned more about this company's culture in 5 minutes than I could from 100 reports." The chairman swallowed hard. "Mr. Carter, what are you suggesting?" David leaned forward slightly. "I'm suggesting we clean this place from the inside, not just the floors." Mrs. Langford's pulse raced. She knew what he meant. He continued, his voice low but sharp. "True leadership isn't measured by what you own. It's measured by how you treat those who serve when no one's watching." The room was silent. Mrs. Langford's eyes flicked toward the door, but there was no escape. David straightened his jacket. "Now then," he said softly, "shall we begin?" The air in the boardroom was thick, heavy with silence, shame, and the quiet hum of truth. No one moved. Even the ticking clock on the wall seemed afraid to make a sound. Mrs. Langford sat rigid in her chair, her pearls suddenly feeling too tight around her neck. Yesterday she was power. Today she was seen. David stood at the head of the table, calm as still water. He didn't shout. He didn't gloat. He just looked at her, the way only a man who has seen both sides of life can look at someone. "I don't hold grudges, Mrs. Langford," he said quietly, "but I remember lessons." Her throat tightened. I didn't mean what I said yesterday." He tilted his head. "You meant every word. You just didn't expect to see me here." A few board members exchanged uneasy glances. The chairman cleared his throat. "Perhaps we can move on to the agenda." David raised a hand gently. "In a moment. This is part of it." He turned his gaze to the rest of the table. "See, we talk about professionalism, success, brand image. But what about dignity? Respect?" He let the words hang. "How many people working here feel invisible every day?" No one answered. Some looked down. Others fidgeted. David continued, voice steady but deep with feeling. "I started in this company cleaning floors. My mother worked here too. She used to say, 'Kindness shows where titles hide.' And she was right. You can't build anything good when your pride looks down instead of forward." He paused, his eyes softening. "That's why I came back. Not to own, not to punish, but to remind." Mrs. Langford finally spoke, her voice small. "What do you want from me?" David looked at her gently. "Nothing. You already gave me what I needed." She frowned, confused. "What's that?" He smiled faintly. "Proof." Her heart dropped. "Proof of what?" "Of how easy it is for people to forget humanity when they think they have power." The room went still. For the first time in her life, Mrs. Langford couldn't find words sharp enough to hide behind. She stared at him, not at his suit, not at his success, but at his calm. The kind that only comes from surviving what others could never handle. He turned to the board. "From this day forward, every employee, from the top floor to the janitor's closet, gets treated with respect. Real respect. Anyone who can't do that won't work here." The chairman nodded slowly. "Understood, Mr. Carter." David looked back at her one last time. "And Mrs. Langford, the next time you talk to someone mopping a floor, remember, you might be looking at the one person who could change your life." He walked out, leaving silence behind him. The door clicked softly, but its echo stayed, heavy, unforgettable. Mrs. Langford sat there, staring at the reflection of her own face on the polished table. For the first time, she didn't like what she saw, and somewhere deep in that quiet, something inside her cracked. Not from shame, but from awakening. That night, Mrs. Langford didn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw him, standing tall in that boardroom, calm, unshaken, powerful. The janitor, no, Mr. Carter. By morning, the weight of her own words was heavier than any diamond she'd ever worn. She poured herself coffee, but her hands trembled too much to drink it. Her husband tried to speak, but she only whispered, "You don't understand. I humiliated the man who owns half this company." He laughed. "He won't remember." But she knew he would, because she remembered every second of it. When she reached the office, David Carter was already there. He stood by the window, sunlight framing him in gold. He looked at peace, while she felt like glass about to shatter. "Mr. Carter," she said quietly, "I owe you an apology." He turned. "For which part?" She froze. For all of it. He didn't gloat. He didn't smile. He simply nodded for her to continue. "I looked at you and saw what I wanted to see," she said, her voice breaking. "Someone beneath me. Someone I could shout at. And now I realize I wasn't talking to a janitor. I was talking to a mirror." "A mirror?" he asked softly. She nodded, tears welling. "Yes, you showed me who I really am." David walked to the table and placed a small worn name badge down in front of her. It read, "David Carter, Custodial Staff." "I kept this," he said, "to remind myself where I came from. Not to be ashamed of it, but so I never forget what it feels like to be unseen." Her throat tightened. "What will you do with me?" He looked at her kindly. "That depends on what you do next," she blinked. "I don't understand." David stepped closer. "You think apology is about words. It's not. It's about change. I don't need you to beg. I need you to become better than who you were yesterday." Her voice trembled. "And if I try?" He smiled faintly. "Then I'll know you meant it." She took a deep breath, the kind that feels like starting over. "Then I will," she whispered. "I promise I will." David nodded once. "Then we're done here." He turned to leave, but paused at the door. "Mrs. Langford," he said gently, "kindness doesn't make you small. It makes you remembered." When he walked out, she sat alone. No pearls, no pride, no audience. Just a woman who had finally seen herself clearly. And for the first time, she didn't want to hide from the reflection. When Mrs. Langford walked through the office that morning, every step felt different. The same hallways that once echoed her confidence now whispered something else. Humility. The receptionist nearly dropped her pen when she saw her. "Good morning, Mrs. Langford," she said nervously, but instead of her usual cold nod, Mrs. Langford smiled. "Good morning, Sarah. How's your son doing?" "The one who started college?" Sarah blinked. "He's doing great. Thank you for asking." It was the first time anyone had ever heard Mrs. Langford ask a personal question that wasn't about herself. In the cafeteria, employees whispered as she carried her own tray. No assistant, no snapping fingers. She stood in line quietly, even waited her turn. A young cleaner accidentally bumped her elbow while wiping a table and gasped, ready for wrath. But Mrs. Langford simply said, "It's okay, sweetheart. I should have moved." The girl stared in disbelief. "Thank you, ma'am." Mrs. Langford just smiled, her voice softer than anyone remembered. Later that day, she knocked on the janitor's office door, the same small, windowless room she once pretended didn't exist. David Carter looked up from a stack of papers, calm as ever. "Mrs. Langford," he said, "this is a surprise." "I wanted to thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" "For embarrassing me." He raised an eyebrow, amused. She smiled faintly. "It was the lesson I needed. I used to think respect was something you demanded. Now I know it's something you earn." David leaned back. "You didn't need my help for that lesson. You just needed a mirror." Her eyes glistened. "I found it finally. And I want to make this right. You said yesterday that change starts with action. So I started something new." She handed him a folder. Inside were typed pages with bold letters at the top. Employee Dignity and Opportunity Initiative. David read the first few lines. A program to ensure fair pay, safe working conditions, and education grants for custodial and maintenance staff within the company. He looked up at her. "You wrote this?" She nodded. "And I'll fund it myself. Call it my first act of apology." For a long moment, he said nothing. Then a slow smile crossed his face. "You're learning fast." She exhaled deeply, a tear slipping down her cheek. "I'm trying." David stood, extending his hand. "Then keep trying. That's how the world changes." She shook his hand, humbled. "No, Mr. Carter, that's how people change." Outside, the staff who once feared her now smiled when she passed. And for the first time in her life, Mrs. Langford didn't need power to feel seen. She just needed to be human. A week passed since that quiet handshake, but Mrs. Langford couldn't stop thinking about it. The janitor turned owner, the man she'd insulted, who had shown her mercy instead of revenge. That mercy haunted her more than any punishment ever could. Every time she looked at herself in the mirror, she whispered the same words. "I want to be better." And for the first time in years, she meant it. That Friday morning, as she was leaving her office, she noticed an envelope on her desk. It was plain, no name, no logo, just her initials, CL, written in black ink. She frowned and opened it. Inside was a short note. "Dinner, 7 p.m., Downtown Community Center. Come as yourself, not as Mrs. Langford, D.C." She held the note like it was a test. Her first thought was fear. Her second, curiosity. By evening, she stood outside the community center, an old brick building with chipped paint and a broken sign. She'd driven past it 1,000 times before, never once wondering who it was for. Now she was walking through its doors. Inside were long tables covered with food, trays of baked chicken, cornbread, pasta, fresh fruit. Volunteers moved like a family, laughing and serving meals to the homeless, the tired. The unseen. At the center of it all stood David Carter, sleeves rolled up, apron tied around his waist, handing out plates with a smile. He looked nothing like a CEO. He looked like home. When he saw her, he smiled softly. "You came," she hesitated. "You didn't say what this was for." He handed her a pair of gloves. "You'll figure it out." For a moment, she just stared at him. "You want me to serve?" He nodded. "You said you wanted to change. Here's where change starts." At first, she moved awkwardly, nervous, self-conscious. But then a little boy tugged at her sleeve and said, "Thank you, lady," with a smile so pure it melted everything in her chest. By the 3rd plate, she was smiling back. By the 10th, she was laughing. David watched from across the room, quiet, proud, not saying a word. When the line ended, she walked over to him, wiping her hands. "You do this often?" He nodded. "Every week. My mother started this center before she passed. She used to say, 'If you want to feel rich, feed someone who's hungry.'" Mrs. Langford's throat tightened. "You never mentioned her." He smiled faintly. "You reminded me of her once, before the boardroom. She was strong too, but her strength came from kindness." Her eyes glistened. "I wish I'd met her." He looked at her gently. "You just did." She blinked, confused, until she saw the photo hanging on the wall behind him. A woman, smiling, serving food, her eyes warm and familiar. The name under it read, Angela Langford Carter. Her breath caught. "Langford?" David nodded slowly. "My mother's maiden name." She stepped back, heart pounding. "That means," he finished quietly, "you yelled at your cousin's son, ma'am." The world stopped. Mrs. Langford's lips parted, but no sound came out. The noise of the community center, the clatter of plates, the hum of voices, faded until it was just her heartbeat echoing in her ears. She turned back toward the photograph. Angela Langford Carter. That smile, those eyes, the same gentle light she remembered from her childhood, before wealth and pride had built walls between the family. "No," she whispered. "That can't be." David watched her quietly. "You remember her, don't you?" Her hand went to her chest. "Your mother was my aunt. She used to visit my parents when I was little. I remember. She brought me my first doll. She was kind. Too kind." He nodded. "She was. Even when your father turned her away after she married my dad. Said she'd lower the family name." Her breath caught. "He did that?" David's voice stayed calm, but it carried pain. "She never held it against anyone. She told me, Family doesn't stop being family, even when they forget you. Tears gathered in Mrs. Langford's eyes. Oh, God! David's tone softened. When she got sick, I promised her I'd do one thing. Build something honest. Something that didn't judge a person by their clothes or title. She said, then start at the bottom, son. You'll understand the world better from there. Mrs. Langford looked at him, her voice breaking. And you did, he nodded. Every night, every hallway, every dirty floor. He smiled faintly. I learned more pushing that mop than I ever did in boardrooms. She couldn't hold back her tears anymore. All this time, I was cruel to my own blood. He took a slow breath. It's not about cruelty. It's about blindness. Pride's a fog. You don't see what you're losing until it's gone. She wiped her face, voice trembling. I wish I could tell her I'm sorry. David looked up at the photo. You just did. For a long moment, they stood there. 2 generations of a broken family finally seeing each other. Not rich and poor, not boss and worker, just people carrying the same blood, the same lessons, the same pain. Mrs. Langford whispered, Your mother raised a better person than I ever became. David smiled gently. She raised both of us, just took you a little longer to find her lessons. That broke her. She covered her mouth, sobbing quietly. David stepped closer, placing a hand on her shoulder. You can't rewrite yesterday, ma'am, but you can still live tomorrow different. She looked up, eyes red but full of new strength. Then I will. I'll honor her. And you. He nodded, eyes soft. Then maybe the Langford name will finally stand for something worth remembering. And for the first time, she smiled without pride, just gratitude. The next morning, sunlight poured through the glass lobby like liquid gold. The same marble floor that had once echoed with Mrs. Langford's anger now carried something new. Quiet footsteps, humility, peace. She stood in the center of it, staring at her reflection in the polished surface, not to admire herself this time, but to remember. This was the same floor she once believed was too expensive to touch. Now she whispered softly, "Thank you," and smiled because she finally understood. David walked in, dressed simply, no suit jacket, no entourage, just the same calm presence that had changed everything. "Good morning," he said, his voice carrying warmth instead of power. She turned and smiled. "Good morning, Mr. Carter. Or should I say cousin?" He chuckled. "David's fine." She hesitated, then held out an envelope. "This is for you." He frowned slightly. "What's this?" "A scholarship," she said. "In your mother's name. The Angela Langford Foundation. It'll fund education for custodial workers' children. Every single one who dreams of something bigger." For a moment, David didn't speak. His eyes softened as he opened the envelope and saw the paperwork inside. "She'd like that," he whispered. She always said education was the cleanest kind of power. Mrs. Langford smiled faintly. "It's my way of saying thank you for reminding me where I came from and what I almost lost." David looked at her with quiet pride. "You didn't lose it, Clara. You just forgot. And sometimes, forgetting is how we learn to remember right." Her eyes filled with tears, but they were happy this time. "Do you think she'd forgive me?" David looked toward the window, where sunlight touched the framed photo of his mother hanging in the hall. She already did. A janitor entered quietly with a mop and bucket, just starting his shift. He paused nervously when he saw Mrs. Langford. She smiled. "Good morning." He blinked, unsure how to respond. Good morning, ma'am." "Take your time on this floor," she said softly. "It deserves to shine." David caught her eye, and she smiled again. Gentle, peaceful, human. Later that day, as David and Mrs. Langford stood at the dedication ceremony for the new foundation, the crowd clapped. But the moment wasn't about applause, it was about legacy. 2 people, once divided by pride, now united by compassion. As the speeches ended, Mrs. Langford leaned over to David and whispered, "You know, I used to think wealth meant having more than others. Now I know it means using what you have to lift others higher." David smiled, eyes glistening. "That's the lesson my mother wanted us both to learn." And as the crowd cheered and the lights dimmed, the camera of life seemed to pull back, showing that same marble floor glowing under their feet, the same floor where arrogance once stood now held forgiveness. The end. Moral. True wealth isn't measured by what's in your account, but by how much kindness lives in your heart. Because the ground you walk on today may belong to the same people you once looked down on.